They said the nursery rhyme was just a song. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. It echoed through playgrounds for centuries, clapped between tiny hands, danced in circles, laughed through by children with no idea what they were singing. But the bridge remembers, and some say it still hungers. Rain had soaked the old city for 3 days straight. In the outskirts of modern-day London, nestled between a cluster of residential flats and the edge of a crumbling embankment, stood a neglected stretch of stone walkway. It wasn't the London Bridge tourists swarmed, sleek and steel, and lined with buses and phone cameras. This was something else, a forgotten relic, the foundation of an earlier bridge, once buried by time, unearthed during a failed redevelopment, and then quietly left to rot. Locals called it the Bones. There were whispered stories among the tenants living nearby, stories about children waking in the night, humming the old song, of animals disappearing into the water, of shapes seen under the surface, just for a moment, and always the same refrain in every telling. Don't walk across the stones after midnight. No one knew who first said it, but once you heard it, it stuck. The tenants in the flats closest to the river wouldn't take their bins out after dark. Parents kept their children indoors. And still, things went missing. Keys, shoes, a whole bike once. Little things, innocuous, easy to dismiss. Until the Harrisons moved in. The Harrison family arrived in early spring, taking a second-floor flat directly across from the bridge's remains. Martin and Elise, a young couple in their early 30s, and their 8-year-old daughter, Lila. Martin worked from home as a graphic designer, while Elise had just taken a job as a night shift nurse at the nearby hospital. They wanted quiet, cheap rent, a place with character. They hadn't asked why the previous tenant left mid-lease. They hadn't been told. Lila was a strange little girl. She wasn't unkind or difficult, but she seemed misaligned, slightly out of rhythm with other children. She drew faces that didn't quite belong to people. She whispered to the walls, and once told her mother the ceiling breathed when it rained. Elise chalked it up to imagination, but Martin sometimes watched her out of the corner of his eye, the way you might watch a candle flicker too hard in a closed room. The first time they noticed the bridge was during one of those endless grey evenings when the sky pressed low and colour vanished from the world. "Look at that," Elise murmured, sipping tea by the window. "That part of the river bank. Do you see it?" Martin squinted through the fogged glass. "Huh, looks like old stonework." Lila padded silently into the room, her stuffed rabbit dragging behind her. "It's the place from the song," she said, "where they buried the lady." Elise blinked. "What lady, sweetie?" "The one in the walls, so it won't fall down." They laughed it off half-heartedly, but that night Elise found herself Googling London Bridge burial and scrolling through articles that reference folklore, human sacrifice and foundation rites. One theory suggested that in ancient times, bridges were believed to require a soul to remain standing. Some stories said animals had been used, Others were more sinister. Bridge guardians, the article said. Chosen, walled in alive to watch and protect. She shut her laptop, unsettled. Outside, the rain started again. A week later, Lila began singing the rhyme in her sleep. London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady. Her voice was slow, lilting, too clear. Not the playful chanting of a child, but something older, something echoing. Elise stood outside her daughter's room one night, heart pounding, listening to the melody repeat and repeat and repeat. She opened the door. Lila was sitting up in bed, eyes wide open. Her lips moved, but the voice no longer seemed to come from her throat. The dreams began shortly after. Martin woke one night drenched in sweat, unable to breathe. He swore he'd been standing in ankle-deep water, holding a stone in his hands, and someone behind him kept whispering, "Choose, choose." Elise dreamed of walls closing in, of hands reaching out from wet brickwork, of voices murmuring just under the surface of things. And Lila changed. She stopped drawing entirely, stopped speaking much. She spent hours by the window, staring at the bones of the old bridge. Once, Martin found her outside in the early dawn, her feet muddy and her pyjamas soaked. "I was only looking," she said. "The lady sang to me." That day, Elise called the doctor. It was their downstairs neighbour, an elderly man named Albie, who gave the warning. "She's been chosen," he said plainly, without blinking. "The bridge wants her. Best get out while you can." Elise laughed in disbelief, but Albie didn't smile. "She sings it, doesn't she? When she sleeps. That means it's remembered. It's ready." He spoke in riddles after that, about echoes that lived in stone, about blood bargains, about a rhythm older than time, but the seed had been planted. And that night, Martin saw her standing by the window again, singing softly, arms out like a sleepwalker. Build it up with wood and clay, wood and clay, wood and clay. On the 7th night, Elise didn't come home. The hospital said she'd left her shift early, citing dizziness. She never arrived at the flat. Her phone rang once, then went silent. Martin searched the streets. The police opened a report, but it was Lila who told him where to look. "She went to the bridge," she whispered. "They said it was her turn." Martin's heart dropped. "You mean the rhyme, sweetheart? It's just a song. She's the clay, I'm the iron." The next morning, they found Elise's shoes by the edge of the embankment. Nothing else. Martin broke. Something inside him unravelled, and he began scouring the bridge's old history, diving into archives, forums, podcasts, anything that mentioned foundation sacrifices, or spirit guardians or child wards. He kept hearing the same story, over and over. The bridge always takes what it needs, and once it remembers, it never forgets. Now, he watches Lila from the window as she hums to herself. She doesn't play, She doesn't eat much, but she sings, and each time she reaches the end of the rhyme, her voice fades just a little more. My fair lady. The police were polite but firm. Elise Harrison was an adult. She'd left work of her own accord. There was no evidence of foul play. Her shoes were on the riverbank, Martin said again, staring at the two officers in disbelief. She's never done anything like this. Never. One officer, a younger man with tired eyes, sighed gently. We understand, Mr. Harrison, but there's nothing else we can do until she's been gone for 48 hours. Martin wanted to scream, but instead he nodded like a man accepting a sentence. After they left, he stood alone in the flat's hallway, the walls closing in around him. Then he heard it, soft, from the living room. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. His daughter's voice, flat and slow, singing to no one. He found her sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the window, facing the skeletal remains of the old bridge. Her stuffed rabbit lay limply beside her. She wasn't playing, just staring. Lila, Martin said gently. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were too wide, the way they'd been for days now. A porcelain doll gaze unblinking. She's in the stone now, Lila whispered. Martin knelt beside her. Sweetheart, who told you that? They did. Lila pointed to the bridge. She's helping hold it up now, but they still need iron. Martin felt a chill snake down his spine. Who are they, baby? Lila blinked slowly. The others, in the wall. They told me. That night, Martin couldn't sleep. The flat felt wrong, too still. The ticking of the kitchen clock echoed like a hammer. The faint hum of the refrigerator sounded like distant breathing. Every noise scraped across his nerves. He sat up with his laptop, digging deeper. He found forums dedicated to urban legends, subreddits filled with half-insane posts about sacrificial architecture. A few mentioned London Bridge, but not the modern one. Always the bones, the one forgotten beneath progress. One comment stood out. They don't want it to fall. They want it to remember. Stone forgets nothing, especially not the blood that brought its shape. Another read. My grandmother used to say the bridge always takes something from the new children, even if it's small. A voice, a shadow, a memory, or worse. The thread ended there, deleted by the original poster. At 3:17 a.m, Martin gave up. He opened a browser tab and searched for old property records. He traced the buildings near the embankment, the flattened maps that showed what existed before, and then he found it. A line from a historical registry entry, built atop the foundations of the 11th century London Bridge, beneath which sacrifices were rumoured to be walled in during times of unrest. Area remained uninhabited for decades due to persistent flooding and unexplained accidents during construction. There was a photo, grainy, black and white. Two children standing beside the partially excavated foundation, holding hands. A third figure just behind them, shadowed, too tall to be a child, its head bent toward them. Martin stared. The face in the photo was missing, blurred, as if the camera had refused to capture it. He slammed the laptop shut. From the hallway came the sound of humming. By morning, Lila was different again. She no longer spoke in full sentences. She barely responded when Martin asked questions. Instead, she repeated lines of the song like a stuck record. Her eyes looked bruised, not from sleep, but from something deeper, something pulling at her from the inside. Martin took her to the pediatrician. The doctor was kind but unhelpful. Trauma, she said gently. She's processing the disappearance. Children internalize grief in strange ways. Martin didn't argue, but when he looked down at Lila's little hand in his, it felt colder than it should have. That afternoon, he went back to see Albie, the old man downstairs, who'd warned him. The door opened after 3 knocks. Albie looked worse than before, paler. His skin hung loose around his bones, and his hand shook as he held the door open. "I know why you're here," the old man rasped. Martin stepped in without asking. "You said she was chosen. You said the bridge remembers. You were right." Albie shut the door quietly. The flat was dim and smelled like mildew and incense. "There's a pattern," the old man whispered. "They take one, then mark another. A guardian and a lock. The adult is buried in the memory. The child carries the key." Martin stared. "What are you talking about?" "It needs them both. The bridge was built on old bones, lad, older than kings. Before it was London, before there were names. It was a crossing place, between worlds, a tether. But to keep it here, it needs a soul. To keep it sealed, it needs a voice." Martin felt sick. "My daughter, what are they doing to her?" "They're preparing her," Albie said. "She's next, unless the bridge falls, unless someone ends it." Later that night, Martin stood again at the window. The rain had returned, but softer now. A drizzle that whispered against the glass. He watched the bridge. The exposed foundation stones jutted from the earth like ribs. The river lapped against them, sluggish and thick. And in the corner of his eye, something moved. A figure. No light touched it. It stood at the base of the bridge, motionless, facing their building. Martin blinked. It was gone. Behind him, Lila whispered, "My fair lady." Martin didn't sleep. He watched the bridge until dawn. When the sun rose pale and watery over the river, he made a decision. He packed a bag, not to run, not yet, but to break in. He would go down to the foundation during daylight, inspect it, photograph it, touch it if he had to, anything to understand what it wanted, what it was becoming. He dressed Lila for school, though she didn't respond, just sat quietly as he brushed her hair and zipped her jacket. Before she left with the neighbour, she looked back once. "Don't go too close," she said softly. Martin smiled. "I'll be fine." but her eyes were already far away. The stone path was cordoned off by rusted barriers and yellowed signs that read danger, unstable ground, but the fence was easily bypassed. A gap had already been torn in the chain link. Someone else had been here recently. Martin stepped carefully onto the path. Weeds pushed up between the stones, and moss slicked the old mortar. The river sloshed lazily nearby, thick with debris. Closer now, the stones seemed unnatural, too smooth in places, too precisely fit. He knelt beside one section and ran his fingers along the edge. A symbol was carved there, faint, almost worn away by time, a crude spiral intersected by lines. It didn't look Roman or Saxon. It looked older. Suddenly, the wind changed. A low groan came from beneath the stones. Martin froze. He leaned closer, and just as he did, he heard something from underfoot. A voice, a whisper. Choose. Martin scrambled backward, hands skimming the damp stones. His breath steamed in the cold air, but the voice had not been imagined. It had spoken. He stood, scanning the riverbank. Nothing but the groaning tide and the crumbling foundations. No footsteps, no figures, just that sound, not quite wind and not quite voice, rising from beneath the bridge. Choose. It had echoed inside his skull, like an old memory. Male, female, he couldn't tell, but it was layered, like multiple mouths speaking in harmony, worn thin with age. He should have left, called someone, but instead, Martin pulled out his phone and hit record. It's Thursday, he said aloud, his voice shaking. 11:43 in the morning. I'm standing at the foot of the original London Bridge. He paused, scanning the stones again. Something under here. I heard a voice. It said. He stopped. Saying it aloud made it too real. He turned to take photos, snapping shots of the spiral symbols, the old stonework, the river lapping at its broken bones. As he framed another picture, something strange appeared on the screen. A figure, not standing in front of him, but inside a foundation wall, faint as smoke, visible only through the lens. He lowered the phone. Nothing, just empty stone. He raised it again. There she was, a woman. Her eyes were closed, her face sunken but serene, like she'd been laid there to rest centuries ago. Her lips were sealed with a black stitch. Her body was embedded in the wall itself, like the stones had formed around her. Martin's blood ran cold, and as he stared through the screen, her eyes opened. He dropped the phone. It clattered against the stone and bounced into a puddle. Martin cursed, but as he bent to retrieve it, the whisper came again, louder this time, carried in the wind like a curse. Choose the lock, choose the gate. Blood binds, stone waits. He backed away, heart pounding. You're not real, he muttered. This isn't real. But behind his eyes, he could still see her. That stitched mouth, those impossible eyes, watching him like she knew. A noise made him freeze, footsteps scraping stone. He spun around. A man stood behind him at the edge of the ruins, dressed in a janitor's coverall and a city-issued windbreaker, tall, gaunt, his features sharp like a hawk, and something was off, his skin too tight, too pale. "You're not supposed to be here," the man said. Martin tried to steady his breathing. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head. "They won't let you take her back. You're already too close." Martin stepped away, pulse thundering in his ears. "Who are you?" "I keep the gate." With that, the man turned and walked directly into the stone wall. Not behind it, into it. The stone shimmered as he passed through, like the air warped around him. And then he was gone. Martin fled. By the time he reached the flat, Lila was waiting on the sofa, staring at the door before he even opened it. "They don't like it when you wake them," she whispered. Martin dropped to his knees, gripping her shoulders. "What do you mean? Who's waking? Lila, what do you see?" She blinked slowly. "Not see. Here. They're inside me now." Martin pulled her into a hug. Her small body trembled. She smelled like river water. "What are they saying?" She leaned in, mouth to his ear. "They said it's my turn next." Martin didn't take her to school the next day. Instead, he visited the British Library, desperate for answers. He pored over texts, ignored polite inquiries from staff, and traced the origins of the rhyme again and again. "London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down." The rhyme dated back centuries, but variations included strange, forgotten verses. Set a man to watch the gate, set a soul to seal the weight. Iron bones and baby's breath, give the bridge a living death. Lay her soft within the stone, so the ghosts can find their home. Martin's hand trembled as he copied the verses. They weren't just old rhymes, they were instructions. He stayed until the library closed, and on the way out, an archivist caught him by the arm. "You're not the first to come asking about that rhyme," she said, eyes darting. "It always starts with the bridge, then something vanishes." Martin stared at her. "They mark the child," she whispered, "and then the river feeds." That night, Martin placed a recorder beside Lila's bed. He had to know what was happening while she slept. She drifted off quickly, still humming. He watched her for a long time before dozing on the couch. He dreamed of water, of a stone woman, whispering in a tongue he almost understood, of hands reaching through mortar. He woke with a jolt around 3:30 a.m. and from the bedroom came a second voice, not Lila's. Martin bolted up and ran in. She was still asleep, but speaking. No, chanting. He played back the recording. At first, just breathing. Then Lila's whisper, "They're almost done building." Another voice layered beneath it. Male, hollow, ageless. "Choose the gate, choose the lock. The tower will rise when the blood does stop." Martin recoiled from the device. Then Lila sat bolt upright in bed. "Daddy," she said calmly, "the river's inside me." Martin called Albie again. The old man answered with a ragged voice. "It's already begun, hasn't it? You said she was marked. How do I stop it?" Albie wheezed. "The only way to unmark her is to mark another. The bridge doesn't let go. It trades." Martin's stomach sank. "You mean someone else has to?" "Yes," Albie said. "Someone living, someone willing, or chosen." The line went dead. Martin looked back at Lila, who now sat cross-legged in the hallway, humming, "London Bridge is falling down." He covered his mouth to keep from screaming. The next day, he returned to the bridge, not with hope, but with something else, resolve. He wasn't going to let his daughter be taken. The stones were quiet now, almost peaceful, but he knew they were listening. "I'll do it," Martin said aloud. "Take me instead." Nothing replied. The river flowed, brown and indifferent. He stepped forward, placing a hand on the foundation wall. A spark jolted through his arm. Not pain, but memory. Suddenly, he saw flashes, visions not his own. A boy in 1342, bricked alive into the bridge. A woman during the Black Plague, her hands raw, carrying a baby to the wall. A soldier after the Blitz, whispering names into the mortar. And then Elise, his wife, her eyes filled with sorrow as she pressed her palm against the stone. "I chose," she whispered in the vision. Then darkness. Martin collapsed, gasping. So Elise had known. She had traded herself to protect Lila, and now the cycle was incomplete. It needed another. Martin stood slowly. He wouldn't offer a stranger. He wouldn't damn anyone else. But if blood was the price, then his was due. The nights grew longer. The air inside Martin's flat had taken on a thickness that clung to everything, like the heavy damp of a flooded cellar. Even Lila had stopped speaking. She wandered the apartment barefoot, leaving faint wet footprints on the wood, though neither of them had been outside in days. The voices were constant now, from the walls, from the ceiling, from the drains, sometimes in rhyme, sometimes in something older. Martin had begun to write them down, though he didn't know why. The patterns were strange, repeating, recursive, the same words spiralling back on themselves in loops, like something trying to speak through the only language it had left. Stone by stone, the song is laid. Life for death, the toll is paid. Ash to ash, the gate swings wide. London Bridge must never die. He had dozens of variations, scrawled on napkins, envelopes, the backs of receipts. They came without warning, as if the words were being funneled into his skull through unseen cracks. But worse than the voices were the faces. One morning, while washing his hands in the bathroom, Martin looked up and saw not his reflection, but Elise. Her mouth opened to speak, but no sound came. Her eyes weren't angry. They weren't even sad. They were empty, like her soul had already been claimed by the bridge. He'd punched the mirror. Blood ran down his arm in thin rivers. Lila had watched silently from the hall, her expression unreadable. That was the morning the walls started bleeding. Just small streaks at first, rust-coloured, trickling from the ceiling corners or pooling beneath the floorboards. He tested it with a tissue. It congealed thickly. Still, he stayed, because he had finally understood the truth. The bridge wasn't haunting them. It was them. He returned to the site again, this time in the grey hours just before dawn. London Bridge stood as always, ordinary to the untrained eye. People passed over it. Cars rumbled. Joggers hummed by with earbuds in. But beneath all of that, he could hear it. The hum, not mechanical, not wind. A deep, droning vibration. A choir, made of voices. Martin stood at the edge of the river, staring down at the water's reflection. His own face stared back, but it was younger, cleaner, his eyes wide with something close to awe. And then the water shimmered, and dozens of other faces appeared. Men, women, children, all trapped beneath the surface, all silently screaming. He dropped to his knees, bile rising in his throat, but the stone beneath his hands was warm, pulsing. The bridge was alive. That's when the song returned, louder than ever. A child's voice, echoing through the air, clear as bells. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. Martin looked up. Across the bridge, figures had appeared. Children, dozens of them, dressed in old-fashioned school uniforms, grey jumpers, knickers, and long stockings. They stood in a line, hands joined, singing softly. Their faces were slack, eyes hollow, but their mouths moved in perfect unison. He recognised one of them, the boy with the cracked glasses, who had vanished in the park the week Elise died, and another, little Sadie Grant, who had gone missing from her school 2 years ago. More and more joined, ghosts of the bridge, a choir of the forgotten. As Martin stood transfixed, the singing grew louder, a melody underneath the rhyme, rising like a tide, notes that scraped the edge of hearing, like whispers crawling into his brain. He stumbled back, gripping his ears, but the sound was inside him now. Then the line of children parted. At the centre stood a girl, Lila, but not the Lila he'd left at home. This version of her was soaked, hair stringy and dark with river muck. Her skin was pale, her dress clinging to her like a burial shroud. She looked at him, no, through him, and she smiled. Martin ran. He didn't remember how he got home, only that when he burst through the apartment door, the lights were flickering and the television had turned itself on. Static danced across the screen. warping into faces now and then. Lila was gone. Her shoes sat by the couch. Her favourite red stuffed rabbit lay face down on the floor. There were wet footprints leading to the bathroom. He followed them with trembling hands. The tub was full, murky water sloshing gently, despite the stillness of the air, scrawled in steam on the mirror. She chose the bridge. He drained the tub. There was nothing inside. No sign of her. Only a single black stone in the bottom, carved with the same spiral rune he'd seen at the riverbank. He collapsed on the floor and wept until he heard the voice again. This time, not in rhyme, not ancient or cryptic, just a whisper. Come and see, Martin. Come and see what holds the bridge in place. Martin rose slowly, feeling hollow. Something in him had broken open, like a bell whose sound could never be silenced again. He grabbed his coat and the stone, and he walked for the final time to London Bridge. Martin didn't remember crossing the street. One moment he was stepping off the curb, and the next he stood in the middle of the bridge. It was quiet, unnaturally so. No traffic, no people, just the wind curling around him like cold breath. The river below was black glass, and the bridge, it pulsed beneath his feet. He clutched the runestone in his hand. Its surface had warmed, faintly vibrating like a heart. He walked to the edge and stared down, not at the water, but at the stones. Each one looked ordinary, concrete, ancient, but when he reached down and placed the stone in the groove between two slabs, it clicked, and the bridge answered. The sound was deep, like a vault door unlocking from inside the earth. Then the stone beneath Martin's feet opened. He didn't fall, he descended, as though the bridge itself was drawing him down, carrying him beneath its skin. Darkness swallowed him. The descent felt endless. Walls pressed close. Wet stone grazed his arms. The air was thick with rot and something older, something like ozone. A low hum vibrated through his bones. And then he landed in silence. He stood in a cavernous space, arches of black stone stretched above him, curving like ribs. The ceiling vanished into shadow, but faint light bled from the mortar between bricks, pulsing veins of gold and red. The floor was a mosaic of bones, small bones, child-sized, and in the centre of it all, a massive wheel of stone slowly turned, carved with the faces of weeping children, mouth agape in song. The wheel sang the same rhyme over and over. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. Martin stumbled forward, barely able to breathe. The air smelled like childhood and grave dust, like forgotten lullabies sung over open caskets. He knew where he was, the heart of the bridge, and in the centre of that heart stood an altar. Upon it lay a body, not a corpse, a child. Lila, still, breathing, but shallow, as if the bridge had taken her and kept her suspended between worlds. He ran to her, shouting her name, but the sound was swallowed, muffled like shouting underwater. When he touched her skin, it was cold as marble, but beneath it, something moved, not a pulse, a current, a presence, and then it spoke, not with words, with memory. Visions flooded him, centuries of them. He saw the construction of the first London Bridge, saw the workers fall ill and die, saw children pressed into the stone foundations, bodies tucked beneath mortar as blessings to ensure the bridge's strength. He saw priests whispering Latin over bone-filled pits. He saw fires and floods, each time rebuilding, and each time more blood added. He saw Elise. He saw her body offered, not by chance, but because she tried to uncover the truth. Her article had gotten too close, so the bridge claimed her, and now it wanted Lila, a replacement, a cornerstone, the next song to be sung. Martin screamed and grabbed his daughter. The room trembled, the wheel slowed, the chant faltered. He pulled her into his arms, her body weightless, and from the shadows the choir emerged. The children, dozens of them, some centuries old, faces pale and eyes hollow, others fresh, modern, recognizable, the missing, the taken, their mouths opened in silent grief. They did not attack, they merely stood watching, and among them Elise. She stepped forward ethereal, her eyes brimming with sorrow. "Martin," she whispered, though her lips did not move. "If you take her, the bridge will fall. It needs its sacrifice." He looked at her, tears burning his eyes. "I don't care." Elise looked at Lila, then back to him. "Then run." The ground groaned, the wheel cracked, the song fractured. Martin turned and ran through the hall of bones. The tunnel behind him shifted, stone grinded. The walls folded in on themselves, like a living throat rejecting him. He didn't stop. Lila stirred faintly in his arms, murmuring something he couldn't hear. Behind him, the children cried out, not in words, but in one long, mournful note of despair. He ran up a staircase that hadn't been there before. Each step bled beneath his feet, each breath tasted of ash, but he climbed. He burst through a stone arch into cold night air and collapsed on the bridge above. Traffic blared around him. People screamed, but he couldn't hear them. He looked at Lila. Her eyes fluttered open. She breathed. She smiled. And then, from beneath them, the bridge began to crack. The stones split. Screams echoed as a section of the bridge collapsed into the river, sending cars and debris plunging into the Thames. Sirens wailed. News helicopters buzzed overhead. Martin clutched Lila to his chest, sobbing. It was over. The bridge had fallen. Or so he thought. Martin didn't remember the hospital. One moment he was clutching Lila on the broken bridge, and the next, sterile lights blinked overhead, beeping machines, plastic curtains, a nurse asking if he knew what day it was. Lila was fine, they said. No broken bones, no signs of trauma. But they were wrong, because Lila hadn't spoken a word since waking. She just stared, wide-eyed, distant, as if she were still trapped beneath the bridge, as if something had followed her out. Martin kept the runestone close. He wore it around his neck now, hidden under his shirt. Its warmth had faded, but sometimes it pulsed when he was near water or near Lila. The bridge had fallen, yes, but the song wasn't over. The media called it a structural failure. Decades of wear, mismanagement, bad luck. They glossed over the fact that no experts had predicted it, that there were no prior cracks, that no one could explain the sudden collapse of an entire support section. They showed grainy footage of Martin clutching his daughter, running from a fissure seconds before it gave way. The media crowned him a hero. The headlines read, "Father saves daughter in tragic London, bridge collapse." They called it a miracle, but Martin knew better. 2 weeks later, the nightmares returned. Not just his, Lila's too. She would sit bolt upright in the middle of the night, eyes glazed, mouth open, but no sound came out. Just the rhythm. She clapped. Once, twice, then again. Over and over. Build it up with wood and clay. Martin would try to calm her, but her hands kept moving. Wood and clay will wash away. Elise's voice sometimes joined in, from nowhere and everywhere. The song wrapped around their home like smoke, and beneath it, Martin felt the bridge rebuilding. He visited the river. He had to. He needed to know if it was truly gone. But when he stood at the edge of the barricaded zone, concrete barriers and orange fencing keeping people away, he saw the truth. The bridge was already half repaired. 2 weeks, too fast. He asked the workers how. They didn't answer. Their eyes were glassy, unfocused. When he walked past the barriers that night, no one stopped him. The construction site was empty, and yet the machines were running. He walked across what should have been a hollowed ruin, and felt the familiar pulse beneath his feet. The bridge was alive again, feeding. That night, Lila disappeared. Martin woke to an open window and a whisper of the rhyme in the hallway. He ran barefoot down the stairs, calling her name, but the house was silent. No response. Just clapping. Light, steady, rhythmic. He followed the sound into the street. Fog clung to the ground. Street lights flickered. And there, at the end of the block, stood Leela, not alone. Children stood in a semicircle around her. Some he recognised, missing kids, faces from flyers, eyes too wide, skin too pale. Others were wrong altogether, faded figures in period clothes, boys with soot-streaked cheeks, girls with bonnets and bone-white smiles. They were playing a game, hands joined, circling Lila, clapping, build it up with bricks and stone. Martin stepped forward, but the circle snapped its gaze to him in unison. He froze. Lila lifted her head, her mouth opened, and from it came Elise's voice. We all fall down. The ground cracked, and Martin fell. He woke in water, dark, cold, impossible water, rushing and suffocating. Above him, silhouettes circled, distorted through the rippling surface. He swam toward the light, broke the surface, and found himself under the bridge again. Except this time, it was different. The arches glowed faintly red. The walls thrummed with sound, low and steady like a heartbeat. The river flowed around columns, carved with faces, dozens of them. Children, elders, women in mourning veils. The foundation had changed. It was now aware. Martin dragged himself onto a dry platform, gasping. Footsteps echoed above, high, steady, almost ritualistic, a procession. He staggered forward, hand to the wall. Voices began to chant, not just children this time, adults too. Different versions of the rhyme, woven together into a single layered sound. London Bridge is falling down. Build it up with iron and steel, my fair lady. Each voice a thread in the larger hymn. And then he saw her again, Elise, standing where the altar had been. But her face had changed, one eye gone, skin grey and lined with cracks. She was becoming part of it. You should have let her stay, Elise said softly, almost kindly. The bridge took me. It wanted her next. You broke the chain. Martin stepped closer. It's not taking her. Elise looked past him. It already has. Martin turned. Lila stood just beyond reach, feet barely touching the ground, her face blank, her mouth still clapping the rhythm, over and over. The rune stone around his neck burned. You can't stop it, Elise said. You can't break a song once it's started. It only ends when all the verses are sung. Martin shook his head. No. He reached for Lila, and something stopped him. Not a hand, a weight, as though the air between them had thickened into iron. He pushed through it, burning with purpose, the rune stone glowing brighter with every step. Behind him, the children began to scream, not in fear, but in protest. The bridge itself wailed, stone cracked, water surged upward from beneath the floor, flooding the chamber. Elise tried to reach him, her voice pleading, fractured, almost human again. But he kept walking, eyes locked on his daughter. He grabbed Lila, pulled her close, and the runestone shattered, a burst of light, a scream that belonged to the bridge itself, and then darkness, total. When Martin opened his eyes, he was somewhere between waking and drowning. The world smelled of whetstone and copper. Something distant hummed like machinery, or perhaps a song still echoing underwater. Lila lay next to him, breathing, alive. Her small fingers curled around his, her chest rising and falling in slow, even rhythm. For the first time in days, her expression was soft, peaceful. The clapping had stopped. The bridge had fallen silent. But it hadn't disappeared. Not entirely. They found him near the embankment at dawn, curled around his daughter on the muddy shore like shipwrecked sailors. Emergency responders shouted and splashed through the shallows. Flashlights cut through the morning fog. People screamed his name, cried with disbelief. He barely registered it. His eyes were locked on the river. A strange section of water shimmered unnaturally, rippling without wind. Beneath it, something massive stirred, something old. It shifted once, and then was still. The bridge above was intact, fully rebuilt. Even the unfinished portions had been completed overnight. No one could explain it. Not the architects, not the press, not the city council. They called it a marvel of modern restoration. But Martin knew it had rebuilt itself. Back at home, Lila didn't speak of what happened. Neither did Martin. Elise's name was never brought up again. Her room was quietly packed away, her things donated or stored. Her presence became a ghost, not even acknowledged, because to speak of her would be to admit that the bridge had claimed her and had wanted more. But late at night, when the house creaked just wrong, or the pipes moaned in the walls, Martin would grip the fragment of the broken runestone he now kept in his pocket. It was cold, but sometimes, just sometimes, it pulsed. One evening, weeks later, Martin stood alone on the embankment again. The river looked calm, peaceful even. The new London Bridge gleamed under the street lamps. Tourists passed by, unaware. Lovers took selfies. Children played nearby, their parents sipping coffee, laughing like nothing strange had ever happened here. But Martin could still hear it, a faint echo in the lapping waves. Build it up with silver and gold. He looked down at the river and saw, just for a moment, a girl's pale face reflected in the water. Not Lila's, Elise, smiling, sad, gone. Back at home, Lila was drawing in her notebook. She had become fond of sketching again, though her pictures were strange. Never people, always structures, arches, supports, foundations, and at the centre of every drawing, a small, cloaked figure holding hands with a child. One afternoon, Martin asked softly, "Who's that?" Lila didn't answer right away. She just tapped her pencil against the paper and whispered, "The lady." Martin never asked again. Over the next year, the bridge gained a reputation. Strange events, flickering lights, children playing games along the banks that no one had taught them, construction workers quitting without explanation, visitors who claimed to hear music at night. Urban legends blossomed. Some said it was haunted, others swore it was cursed, but the truth was stranger than either. It was a living thing now, a hungering thing, and every few years, as if on cue, another collapse, a vanishing, a sacrifice, and then the rebuilding, always the rebuilding. They say old songs never die, they simply change key.